Now, before we get into today's video, I want you all to click the link below and join my email list right now. There's a whole lot of great content that I want to send to you, but YouTube doesn't let me show you. Must be systemic racism. They deleted a bunch of our videos, but that will not stop me from telling you the truth. So join my email list right now. The link is in the description. I want to talk about the interview that Joe Rogan did with Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg is the CEO of Facebook. And Mark Zuckerberg, along with Twitter, suppressed the New York Post story about Hunter Biden and his laptop. And obviously, it came up in the interview.
There was a lot of attention on Twitter during the election because of the Hunter Biden laptop story. The New York Post.
Yeah, we had that too.
Yeah, so you guys censored that as well?
So we took a different path than Twitter. I mean, basically, the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, like, you should be on high alert. We thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump of that's similar to that. So just be vigilant.
Notice how much Zuckerberg is hemming and hawing. Some folks came to us and told us because of 2016 interference, there's about to be a dump, and for us to be vigilant. What seems to me Zuckerberg is tiptoeing around is that they were referring to the Hunter Biden New York Post laptop story, and they were warning him, inducing him that when that story came out, to perceive it as Russian disinformation and therefore suppress it. They didn't have to put a gun to his head. They warned him there's going to be some Russian disinformation. And when the story came out, Zuckerberg says, clearly this is what they warned me about, and this must be Russian disinformation. That's why the FBI came to me and said this. Talk about election interference. And there's more.
Fewer people saw it than would have otherwise. So it definitely...
By what percentage?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's meaningful.
Fewer people saw it than otherwise would have seen it. How many? I don't know, but it's meaningful. Well, Media Research Center did a study, and they found that 16% of Biden voters say had they known about the Hunter Biden laptop story, they would not have voted for Biden. So you're damn right it's meaningful. And there's more.
What we do is we have, if something is reported to us as potentially misinformation.
If something's reported to us, the FBI report it to you?
Important misinformation. We also have this third-party fact-checking program because we don't want to be...
third-party fact-checking program. Who chooses the third parties?
Deciding what's true and false. And for I think it was 5 or 7.
We have a third-party fact-checking. Look, we don't want to decide what's true or false. Who chooses the fact-checkers?
Days when it was basically being determined whether it was false. The distribution on Facebook was decreased, but people were still allowed to share it. So
the distribution on Facebook was decreased. A fancy way of saying a whole lot of people who otherwise would have seen it didn't see it.
You could still share it. You could still consume it.
So when you say the distribution is decreased,
it got shared.
How does that work?
It basically, the ranking in newsfeed was a little bit less. Because, I mean, it turned out after the fact, I mean, the fact checkers looked into it. No one was able to say it was false, right? So basically it had this period where it was getting less distribution.
A period from 5 to 7 days. This is right before the election. An eternity.
So yeah, I mean, but I think like, I think it sucks though. I think in the same way that probably having to go through like a criminal trial, but being proven innocent in the end sucks.
What? It changed the election. It sucks. You know, kind of like having a criminal trial and finding yourself innocent sucks. So all's well that ends well. It might have been dicey for you as a charged criminal defendant, but in the end, you were found not guilty. So it may suck, but in the end, it doesn't suck as much. It sort of sucks a little less. Well, the new GDP statistics are in, and they show that we are indeed in a recession. Whether the Biden administration calls it a recession or not, most Americans think our economy is heading the wrong way. Inflation at a 40-year high right now, and if all your money is in the market or tied to the US dollar, you're messing with fire. Meanwhile, precious metals like gold are doing exactly what they should.
So what do I do?
Hedge against inflation by texting EPOCH to 989898 and get a free information kit on how to diversify and protect your savings with precious metals from Birch Gold Group. With an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, countless 5-star reviews, and thousands of satisfied customers, gold is the right investment to make right now. Again, text EPOCH 989898 to claim your free, no obligation information kit on how to protect your hard-earned savings with gold. FBI comes to him. Keep in mind, the FBI had the laptop. A little factoid that should have been brought up. Had the laptop. Had the laptop in their possession. They go to Zuckerberg and they say, yo, the Russians are going to dump a lot of disinformation. Be forewarned. The laptop story comes out. It's suppressed. By the way, did the FBI pick up the horn and call Zuckerberg and say, well, we weren't talking about the laptop story because we have the laptop. We know that's not a lie. We know that's not Russian disinformation. No, they didn't. Over 50 former intelligence officials, is how they phrased it, write an open letter. That gets published. The New York Post story doesn't, but the open letter does, and says this story has all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. So, to recap, FBI in full possession of the Hunter Biden laptop, therefore knowing it's not Russian disinformation, goes to Zuckerberg and says, Zuckerberg, we have it on good authority that the Russians are going to dump some disinformation. So I just want you to be warned. Why are you going to Facebook? Unless you want Facebook to take some sort of action to suppress the story, which is exactly what Zuckerberg did. 79% say truthful coverage of Hunter Biden's laptop would have changed the 2020 election, says the New York Post. Media Research Center, 1 in 6 Biden voters would have changed their minds had they known the full story, as mentioned a moment ago. I have a question. How do you conduct a very lengthy interview with Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, who spent $419.5 million of his own money on election officials during the 2020 election to get up Democrat turnout? There's a book called Rig by Molly Hemingway, a documentary with the same name by Citizens United, all documenting Zuckerberg spending $419.5 million of his own money on election officials targeted in certain districts to ensure a greater Democrat turnout, as Molly Hemingway explains.
Yeah, I wanted to know exactly what happened during the campaign. So for me, that means I interview everybody who's involved at the state and the national level. And I did find out that this election was unlike any election we'd ever had.
Again, how does Rogan, who's got the most popular podcast in the world, interview for a long time, I think it's over 2 hours, Mark Zuckerberg, without bringing this up? He and his wife, $419.5 million into 2 nonprofits that largely donated to Democrat counties. The nonprofits are called the CTCL and the CEIR. And they gave grants to counties to help fund the election and implemented Democratic-approved policies like mail-in voting. And Zuckerberg's contributions nearly match the federal and state funds for COVID-19, which was $479.5 million. So the amount of money that we spent on COVID-19, federal and state funds, was matched by Zuckerberg and his wife, who spent almost the same amount to influence the election in favor of Democrats. One of the nonprofits, CTCL, the grants boosted Biden's per dollar vote value, and Biden counties were 3.5 times related election expenses, and the grants boosted 3.5 times more likely to receive funding from that group. In other words, the Biden side were 3.5 times more likely to receive money than areas that would have benefited Republican votes. The Daily Mail said, and I'm quoting them, on average, Biden counties received $2.85 per vote compared to Trump counties that received 89 cents. I repeat, on average, Biden counties received $2.85 per vote compared to Trump counties that received 89 cents. And the other nonprofit, CEIR, donated $64.4 million of Zuckerberg's money to 22 states and the District of Columbia, clearly influencing the outcome of the election.
That the media environment was corrupt, just like you just talked about. They suppressed that Hunter Biden story, which was explosive. They elevated fake news. They knew that big tech had manipulated. They did not want to have any information out that helped their political opponents or hurt their political allies, and so they censored information and they deplatformed people. And they also changed a lot of our election laws. Sometimes they did that legally and constitutionally. Sometimes they didn't. And Mark Zuckerberg, one of the world's wealthiest individuals, funded the private takeover of government election offices, and that enabled a bunch of left-wing activists to come in to government election offices and actually handle many things in election, from voter registration to voting to vote counting.
Mark Zuckerberg was not asked by Joe Rogan about any of this. One more time, how do you interview this man and not bring this up?
And he put a lot of money in. He put money on both sides. And he said, look, I'm funding both to make sure this is a pandemic, a 2020 effective election. But he was putting an unequal amount. So that was disingenuous.
Well, yeah, they claimed that it was bipartisan, but they'd give a little bit of money to a Republican-leaning county and then like $10 million to Democrat counties. And it really did make a difference. It's
a little bit to Republicans, just so we can say it's bipartisan, and a boatload to Democrat counties.
Taken a while to figure it out, but researchers have shown that this elevated Joe Biden's vote totals in key swing states.
How do you not ask the man about this? That's like interviewing the Wright brothers, not asking about airplanes. Or interviewing Henry Ford, not asking about cars. Or interviewing O.J. Simpson, not asking about him murdering Ron and Nicole. I guess that went into a dark direction, didn't it?
It's a very savvy plan, but now it's being made illegal because a lot of people understand we can't have tech oligarchs funding our government election offices. It'd be like the New England Patriots hiring and staffing the referees for games that they play against other people.
Right, and the crazy thing is Mark Zuckerberg, the individual, can only put maybe $2,200 in, but as a company, you can put hundreds of millions in. It's crazy.
Specifically, $419.5 million.
Here's an excerpt from your book, and you write this. Much of Silicon Valley's anger over Trump's victory was about their inability to control American opinion. In the past two elections, the tech industry has loudly and publicly taken credit for helping Obama's two victorious campaigns. But Silicon Valley's Orwellian reaction to 2016 proved once and for all that the visionaries at America's tech companies were oppressors, not liberators. Expand on that.
Well, in 2016, President Trump had a lot of success in using social media to bypass corrupt partisan media that would not let his message out. And so he used social media to talk directly to the people. These tech oligarchs knew that had happened, and they actually overtly promised that they wouldn't let it happen again. So they knew that they had to suppress information, constrain the free flow of information to help their political allies and hurt their political enemies. And so they censored, they deplatformed, and most dramatically, they took one of the most legitimate stories of the 2020 campaign, which was the Biden family business and what exactly people get when they give Biden family members so much money. And they just didn't cover it. But then when some people were covering it, like the New York Post, they actually took those people off. They deplatformed them from social media companies, and they wouldn't let people share that information. And so they just did a war on information because they knew that if people had information, they might vote for their political opponent.
Now, I got a question to all the people who are watching this, who've bought into this business about Donald Trump supporters being election deniers, Donald Trump being a conspiracy theorist, Donald Trump people going to the Capitol building on January 6th to create an insurrection because they believed the election was quote unquote stolen. Look at me and my baby brown African-American libertarian eyeballs. Does it not bother you that Mark Zuckerberg spent $419 million influencing the election to the benefit of the Democrats? Does it not bother you that the FBI goes to Zuckerberg in full knowledge of the validity, of the truthfulness of the story about the Hunter Biden laptop story and lies to him and suggests that it's disinformation to the point where he and Twitter essentially shut down this story? Twitter shut it down altogether. Zuckerberg says, well, we changed it so that the algorithm meant that it wouldn't be seen by as many people as possible. How many fewer people saw it? He said, he was asked, I don't really know, but it was meaningful. Damn right it was meaningful. And as Molly Hemingway points out, here is what's going on in our country. When Donald Trump ran in 2016, he was perceived by the media to be a joke. And they had him on television all the time. I watched CNN, MSNBC. They had him on all the time because every time he was on, the ratings went up, but they thought of him as a cartoon caricature, that he would never, ever, ever knock off all of his rivals, many of whom had far more experience. And then little by little, he began picking off his rivals to the point where people like the New York Times, CBS, NBC, ABC, MSNBC, LA Times went, holy bleep, we've created a Frankenstein monster. Because we did not take this man seriously enough, we indirectly helped him get into the office. And because we weren't monitoring social media, he was on Twitter all the time, blasting away at fake news. We allowed his message to get through to people who were influenced enough to vote for this guy, whom we perceive to be a fascist and a Hitler and a dictator and a racist and a sexist, and fill in your favorite ist. We're not going to let it happen again. And they were determined not to. So Mark Zuckerberg takes $419.5 million of his own money, puts it in two nonprofits that supposedly were there for good government, and put the money in the hands of election officials who would influence the vote in favor of Democrats. And maybe a little bit for Republican counties so it would look good on paper. Now, when Citizens United did a documentary about this called Rigged, a few days after the documentary came out, Mark Zuckerberg said he wasn't going to do this again. Why? If he did nothing that was underhanded, nothing that was sneaky, nothing that was perhaps even illegal, why would he then say, I'm not going to do it again? Because he was exposed. And a lot of people felt it was wrong. And Mark Zuckerberg has now said he's not going to do it again. Again, how you interview this man, this influential man, who single-handedly had a greater impact on the 2020 election than any other person, how you interview him for 2 hours and not bring this up is absolutely beyond me. We come back, we're going to talk about student debt, or I should say student debt forgiveness. Don't go away. Hope you enjoyed that video. The full show is available to watch right now on Epoch TV. Just click the link in the description below to learn more, because we've got a country to save.